So a warm welcome to everybody. My name is Deborah McGargle and I am a corporate and commercial lawyer and also an entrepreneur. I've worked with and founded a number of high growth technology startups, raising over 1 billion in early stage funding. I've worked with accelerator programs and tech giants on the US East Coast, as well as being general counsel for Rolls-Royce and the Siemens Group in the transmission and distribution of electricity space. My particular interests are in capital markets, private capital markets. I love law tech, diversity, and my main area which I look at is access to venture capital for women founders. And I'm delighted to be here today to moderate this wonderful panel on women's entrepreneurship. I don't know how many of you here were at the Edinburgh conference last year. It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And we looked at some of the challenges then which impacted women's entrepreneurs. So we discussed things around how we could develop viable solutions to address the main barriers holding women back, and the need for more intensive analysis to understand the motivations and the experiences underlying the data that we could see at that time. And then as you're all aware, we are now in the middle of a global pandemic, and the impact of COVID on women's entrepreneurship has been very much under the spotlight. Two reports which I've referred to recently have been the McKinsey report and an Enterprise Nation report, which picked up that more than ever, the usual suspects, the usual limbs affecting women's entrepreneur were very much at the forefront. So funding, network, education, and access to digital resources. And when we were looking at the panel on entrepreneurship, we wanted to make it a very positive panel, talking about the great work that we can do moving forward. But I wanted to do a deeper dive into these areas with our panelists today, given that this is their expertise. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce you to Keith Herman, Helen Nye, Kamala Zladi, and Dr. Haya Al-Dajani. Who have given their time today. We're on a very, very wide-ranging time clock here. It's extraordinarily late for Helen, I know, coming up towards the midnight hour. So I'd like them to introduce themselves a little bit first and tell you a bit about their work and their areas of expertise, and then we'll move forward to some questions. If anybody does have questions as we go through the session, with this being Zoom, if you could maybe pop them in the chat box and we can pick them up at the end, and I think that will make things move forward a lot more smoothly. So perhaps Keith, could I start with you to make an introduction to yourself and the work that you're doing?
Sure. Hello, my name is Keith Herman. I'm Director of Higher Ed Research, a consultancy specializing in higher education. I've worked with senior university and business leaders across a wide range of domains. Most recently, I worked as Director of Employability and Careers and Strategic Lead for Degree Apprenticeships at the University of Surrey. My experience spans managing the student journey, graduate employability, academic engagement, entrepreneurship education, and higher education leadership. As regards my interest in entrepreneurship and small business development, I worked previously with Dinah Bennett at the Small Business Centre at Durham University Business School. And there I led a team focused on entrepreneurship education, graduate new venture creation, and running management development programs for fast-growing SMEs in Northeast England. I also co-authored a report on developing entrepreneurial graduates for the National Agency for Innovation called NESTA, the National Centre for Entrepreneurship in Education, the NCEE, and the Council for Industry and Higher Education. That's a very brief introduction from me.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Helen, can I turn to you now?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, wonderful, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Helen, and you can also call me Juan, and I live in China. I used to study in the UK. I also used to work for some international organizations based in China, like UNDP, UNEP, and WWF. But I started my own NGO 6 years ago. It's just started from building a sunshade by using the CIG as a thin film solar panels. I just want to make the sunshade and the cooling down my balcony. And this started my education for sustainable development career by chance, because this balcony has been attracting more than 15,000 people from more than 10 countries in the past 6 years. And because later I installed aquaponic system using the water tank to provide the fish pool to fit my plants. And also I have the EV car charging station for my my own EV. And also I use my kitchen waste to make compost to feed my vertical farm. I grow my own vegetables. And later, I also have the irrigation system. Although I'm now living in Suzhou and the balcony in Shanghai is still self-sustained. So this is a mini family-based technology, environmental technology museum. And I discovered there was a big demand from the society. So many people are interested in low carbon lifestyle. And we, in the first 2 years, we have more than 500 workshops in different communities in Shanghai and in Suzhou. But 2 years ago, we started to look into the educational system, how we can mainstream this idea into the schools and the communities. So that's how I started to think something new. And I happened to talk to this to Dana, and also Keith is also the entrepreneurial educator. I think we can have a lot of synergies here. I can learn from all you guys. Okay, that's a brief introduction.
Thank you. Kamalis, moving to you now. Could I ask you to do an introduction, please?
Thank you, Deborah. Hello, everyone. My name is Kamalesh Lardi, and I am the CEO and founder of Lardi & Partner Consulting. We specialize in digital transformation, specifically for large corporates as well as SME companies. And I've spent about 20 years of my career in business advisory, supporting companies in understanding technology and its application for engaging customers, optimizing business operations, as well as new business model and revenue generation opportunities. I have deep dived into different types of technologies like AI and virtual and augmented realities, and even blockchain. Blockchain is a specific area of expertise for me because I've had a great interest in the potential transformative impacts of blockchain technology. And I've developed a blockchain solution for the Malaysian Palm Oil Council. And this is basically a solution for traceability in the palm oil supply chain for sustainability. And I teach blockchain for supply chain management at the Zurich University of Business Administration. I'm also the chair of the MBA advisory board at Durham Business School. So it's great to see other Durham connections here. And I'm also a teaching fellow there on disruptive technology as well as consultancy. And I am also a startup mentor. So I work with different incubators, for example, the F10 here in Zurich, which is the incubator for the Swiss Stock Exchange, as well as CV Labs, which is a blockchain incubator. So yeah, that's me for now.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. And interesting to hear more about that later. Dr. Haya, could I ask you to just do your intro and then we can move on to some questions?
Sure. Thank you very much, Deborah. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who's here as we travel around all the different time zones. So I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at the Mohammed bin Salman College for Business and Entrepreneurship in Saudi Arabia. Before coming to Saudi a couple of years ago, I was in the UK for over 20 years in academia. my research is very much focused around this intersection of sort of gender empowerment and entrepreneurship, and how these together really impact upon sustainable development. I think my interest in this area was sparked long before 20 years ago, so maybe more like 30 years ago, when I returned to Jordan after finishing my university studies in the UK and starting my own business there at that time, because I couldn't decide which organization I really wanted to work for on a full-time basis. So, with no training in business or entrepreneurship or startup, these things didn't exist in Jordan at that time. I guess I learned as I went along, and I learned from my successes and my mistakes. And maybe, nowadays, this is what we call experiential learning, right? So did that long ago, still teach with experiential learning pedagogies now. I mean, I'm glad to say that the world has really changed tremendously in terms of supporting women's startups and entrepreneurship more generally. And I'm very happy to have played a part in designing some of the entrepreneurship training programs that have now reached over 6 million people globally, always looking sort of at the very micro, very small end of the entrepreneurship spectrum. In this part of the world, I think I have two missions while I'm here. I think one is really to support the entrepreneurship researchers, educators, practitioners who enable women's entrepreneurship. And my other is really to continue to build sort of even stronger bridges that connect, the wonderful change makers like the ones on our panel today, and the enablers of women's entrepreneurship from this part of the world and the rest of the world too. So thank you very much for having me here today.
No, that's wonderful. Delighted that you are here. And Hein, I think I will just open with a question to you, actually. There's something you didn't touch on in your intro, but something that I found something really interesting when we were talking last week. And we've been looking at social networks, and we all know that the impact of a social network is absolutely key at those early stage entrepreneurial parts of the journey. If we just look at the whole We network and how strong that is, that pays testament to the strength of a network. I know that you have been working with displaced persons, and I would love it if you could talk a little bit more about some of your refugee entrepreneurship work, in particular the challenges that they would face in trying to connect to a network.
Yeah, sure. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about the research with refugee women entrepreneurs, Deborah. I guess for me that fits sort of within that intersection of gender, entrepreneurship and empowerment and sustainable development. So one of the recent projects that I was really fortunate actually to lead was a 3-year study that was funded by the ESRC. And we had an international research team involved, and between us, we had a real privilege of focusing on how, Iraqi and Palestinian and Syrian refugee women who have been displaced to Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey utilize entrepreneurship as a means for poverty alleviation. So with the point on networks and the importance of networking and the power of networks, I think this is really pertinent to the refugee women entrepreneurs, especially as they generally tend to operate within the informal economy. So certainly, within our wider sample, I'd say only a handful, probably counted on one hand, would be working within the formal economy with actual registered businesses. So we found sort of two types of refugee women entrepreneurs and enterprises, let's say. So one, which was really quite common in the south of Turkey, was amongst the Syrian refugee women entrepreneurs who had set up businesses to serve their own community, right? And so here, you know, the issue about networks was that the community, their own community itself, was part of their network, right? So these are where they're able to draw on customers or clients or potential suppliers, etc., from their own community. And in that respect, their entrepreneuring was actually giving them a stronger or more powerful position within their own communities, right? So they were seen as successful sort of members of those displaced communities, and as a result sort of had really well-established networks within those local environments. However, the bigger majority of the refugee women within the 3 countries were actually trying to set up and keep running businesses were offering products and services to the mainstream populations, so those beyond their own communities. And here they really needed a much more diverse network, right? Because they needed their suppliers and they needed their producers and they needed their customers and their clients and everybody else. But they also needed childcare providers and babysitters and so on, you know, from within their own communities too. But I think an important point to remember is that all of these 3 refugee communities are actually quite established. I mean, the youngest of these refugee communities is the Syrian refugee community. And next year we will be commemorating the 10th anniversary of the start of the Syrian war. So you can only imagine how much older, you know, the Palestinian and the Iraqi refugee communities were. So in looking then at the networks of these particular refugee communities, we found that the non-profit organizations or the non-governmental organizations played a real key role as an intermediary between these sort of refugee entrepreneurs within their local communities and the wider world, right? So very often some of these refugee entrepreneurs would be selling their products or their services through organizations such as the NGOs or the NPOs. And some would say that's a good thing because you're offering them a market channel, you're offering them access to the market. And others would say that this model actually maintains that separation, right, between the refugees and everybody else, rather than encouraging the integration and the connectedness. So there, you know, there's an issue around how the NGOs or the NPOs can facilitate the networks and the networking for the refugee women entrepreneurs. I think the other point to mention here, and this challenge I think will be really amplified from the pandemic and during the pandemic, for these refugee women entrepreneurs was their limited digital skills, right? So they have or they lack a sufficient sort of access to the internet, to social media, to technology that can connect them with, you know, stakeholders outside of their communities, be they, you know, customers, clients, etc. But having said that, what we actually found was that the majority had mobile phones, right? So they didn't have computers or laptops or iPads, but they had mobile phones, and they actually used WhatsApp as the means to be connected with customers, with clients, with the NGOs, but also with their diasporic communities beyond their, you know, their locations, their geographic locations. So I think in many ways, you know, that the networks were really important, not only for business or for business purposes, but for social and well-being purposes, right? In order to remain connected. So I don't think that the networks are simply around business per se, but around being part of a wider connected community.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks. Do any of the other panelists want to jump in on that point on networks with any views? No, that's fine. We can move on. I think it's really interesting how you said there that despite having some limitations with regards to digital access, these entrepreneurs still found a way. They could still find their market, and if that had to be a new marketing channel set up through a WhatsApp group, I think that's absolutely amazing, and it just shows it's the real spirit, it's the real entrepreneurial spirit coming through. That, you know, where there's a desire to do it, the entrepreneurs will find a way to get it done. And Kamal's, I think, leading on about access to global markets. I know that Haya was talking about access to markets in terms of the network, but when we were speaking last week, you talked about how democratized information had become, and how some people believe that digital adoption had actually been accelerated by around 3 years because of COVID-19. And I was fascinated last week to hear your thoughts on the ability of women entrepreneurs to now access these global markets, and the opportunity which actually COVID-19 has afforded women entrepreneurs. So what do you think has changed, and where would a woman entrepreneur start in trying to access this global market?
So Deborah, I think in order to answer that question, we probably need to take a step back to understand that the global business landscape has changed completely. Over the last decade or so, we've seen digital disruption, so the use of new technologies, the digital business models, the new competitive landscapes, access channels on online and so on. All of these elements completely redefine how business is done, or how traditional business could be done. And what we've seen from that is traditional businesses starting to face a completely new competitive landscape from smaller companies, from entrepreneurial companies. So if you imagine companies like Prada or Nike, which, you know, these companies Prada, for example, took about 98 years to reach $1 billion valuation. So market valuation of $1 billion. Nike took about 24 years to achieve that. And we're seeing new digital businesses, companies like Twitter, taking about 1 year to reach $1 billion. And I think it was Instagram that took about 4 years to reach the $1 billion valuation. So these digital technologies and online access has really accelerated our approach to business. And entrepreneurs, the digital native entrepreneurs, have been able to tap into that and really accelerate their own business environment as well. And so what we're seeing is the way we access markets and channels, the way we develop products and services, the way we engage with our customer communities, the way we manage our own business has completely transformed. The old rules of how businesses should be run, we can throw those out, to be honest. And so COVID-19 has then taken this additional stage of acceleration. So if we take, for example, 60% of the global population was already online, and they had access to the online or into the internet. And over the last 12 months, we saw about 321 million people, in addition to that, come online during this COVID environment. We saw about 182 million people start to use social media, new users on social media channels. That's about that's between July and September of this year, and that's about 2 million people per day, which is this massive shift into a digital space. So digital adoption has just accelerated due to COVID. And it's one of the, we talked about this as well, it's one of the small silver linings that came out of the COVID pandemic. But what has happened is entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs particularly, if they're able to tap into these digital channels and really understand how these technologies work and how they can add value for their own business, it can actually accelerate their business 3, 4, maybe even 10-fold compared to a traditional large organization that's still functioning in the traditional way. So if we think about utilizing AI systems are very easily available today. They're online-based systems that you can use to analyze data, for example. So analyzing social media data about your customers. You can get granular information and insights into potential wants and needs and likes of your customers and how you should tailor your products and services to offer it in the market. Content creation and content strategies can be developed online. How do you best engage with your customers? How do you stand out in the market? If you think about an entrepreneur or a female entrepreneur, traditionally the statistics would say about 7% of female entrepreneurs would get media notice or media reports about them. Whereas today, if you have access to the social media channels and online platforms, content management platforms, you can create your own presence online, and you can control your own brand presence and your own brand awareness and accelerate yourself on these channels. And so you don't need to rely so much on these traditional systems anymore. And if we think about traditional customer engagement, for example, we're seeing quite an increase in augmented and virtual reality access points. Utilizing augmented reality to take that engagement with your customer, the digital touch point, to the next stage, where people can really feel the engagement or they receive additional information. And you'll be surprised, you can create a virtual reality app. So for example, I did this over the COVID period, where we developed a virtual reality app for a gallery to showcase their art. And we did it in less than a week. So the technology is plug and play today. It's very much like you're using your phone. It's really easy to use, and you can develop your own solutions, and you can create this level of engagement. It just depends on the level of creativity and whether the information is available to the entrepreneurs. And today, really, information is democratized. You can go pretty much on any online e-learning platform and upskill yourself in terms of how to use these channels, how to use these new technologies to further engage and to accelerate your business. If you think about another aspect of an entrepreneur's life, which is access to key skill sets and access to the resources that you need. Today, we have numerous platforms that allow you to engage virtual resources and remote teams, people with specialized skills that can support you in terms of building the solutions that you need. In terms of, for example, if you want to create a data analytics platform to understand your customer behavior, you can get a data scientist, you can engage someone on $5 an hour, someone who actually understands data. And some of these platforms are really cheap and accessible, and you can get real skill sets off of there. The prerequisites to this obviously is you need to have obviously access to certain data. You need to have to be online, to be connected. But these are things that as an entrepreneur you need to have in its basic necessities in business anyway. So there's a huge amount of potential, I think, for entrepreneurs, particularly for women, and you can get a leg up in terms of business capabilities if you're just able to tap into these different resources.
Do you think the starting point there, Kamalis, is actually at the education level then? When it comes, we look at the STEM subjects, we can see that of all of the STEM subjects, the engagement with technology by young women is going backwards, it's not going forwards. Do you think that, it would look like a very different landscape if perhaps technology and technology-based subjects were made more interesting or kind of girl-friendly at a younger age, and that would help with the progression of accessing digital when they wanted to move forward and perhaps set up their own businesses?
I have two key points here. One is, yes, I think that the information is part of it, or the knowledge is part of it, but the knowledge doesn't have to come in through traditional education forums either. So you can learn a lot from being part of a network. So as Haya mentioned, network of entrepreneurs, for example, shared learning, shared skill sets. So things that I've tried and tested and it works, I can share that information with other female entrepreneurs. As an entrepreneur myself, I started my business 8.5 years ago, and I had to learn everything from scratch. And so while building the business, upskilling myself in terms of how to market, how to engage, how do I sell to my clients on LinkedIn? B2B sales on social media it's an art and a science, right? So learning for myself, and I think part of that learning comes from a formal learning process, but not very many entrepreneurs would have even the time to engage on like an e-learning course. So I think it does come down to the network that you have and the shared learnings, and there's so much available online today in terms of just spending 2 or 3 hours learning about a specific topic and engaging with people on Twitter to ask questions and get responses, and even getting access to some of the top business people online. I think this creates a completely different angle for entrepreneurs to upskill themselves. In terms of, just relating back to the topic of learning and education in STEM, my daughter is 9.5, turning 10 tomorrow actually, and she went into basically coding classes very early on. So she started around 7. And she was very much discouraged because in her class, there were she was the only girl in her class. And it was a discouraging environment, not because there were not enough other girls, but I think just visually for her, she kept asking the question, why aren't other girls taking it? You know, why are they not? Because I know my friends are interested, but they're just not getting into it. And so for her, it didn't quite comprehend why she liked it and they didn't want to engage, although they did like it. So I think this is very much, you know, it's a combination of the education, the formal education in schools, and teachers playing a part of that, but also at home, where parents and you know, the people at home encourage the communities around the children, encourage them to try these new technologies as well. So I think there's still a certain gap there that we can fill, and perhaps this would be the forum where we take something like that on.
Wonderful, thank you. And keeping with the education theme, Keith, you've connected entrepreneurship with education and employability as part of your work at the University of Surrey. Can you give me some insights into how you've been linking these themes together?
Sure, thanks, Deborah. I mean, I'll start with, I guess a philosophical point, which is it's really important, from my view, to ensure that there's appropriate signalling out to students about these different words that we use to describe an educational learning experience. On the one hand, you know, people think about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship education and being entrepreneurial, and often, certainly in educational learning settings in universities and even in schools and colleges, that's often defined as creating a business. And very often, certainly in higher education institutions, entrepreneurship is a thing for the business school. It's not for other subjects. And I think that is a challenge that we have. And so part of the work that we did at Surrey was about signaling how employability and entrepreneurship support each other. And one of the ways we did that actively was that certainly through the Employability and Career Centre, we also promoted the activities of the university's student incubator and the university's student enterprise society, as well as the university's broader sort of enterprise support activity, some of which, of course, was located in the business school, but we encouraged and networked and communicated out to the students that employability is a broad-based thing, to use a phrase. And then alongside that, so that signaling virtue was really important, because it got students to understand that entrepreneurship is not just something that's resident within the business school. It has a broad application to the two students, and an application beyond setting up a business venture. And that's a really important thing, to get students to understand entrepreneurial skills and behaviors and attributes. And the second thing that we did was, I guess, going back into the more traditional university environment, using the employability lens and the employability language. At Surrey, I was responsible for leading the university's renowned professional training placement program, which enables students, undergraduate students, to do a one-year placement in industry as part of their degree program. As part of the design of that placement program, you know, the blend between employability and entrepreneurship was framed within the design of the assessment framework for the placement program. So while students on placement were not running their own businesses and their own business ventures, they worked in a wide range of organizations and very often required to be entrepreneurial in those settings. And so the assessment framework focused on developing employability skills, most of which also apply to being entrepreneurial as well. And we went about ensuring that the students were able to develop these skills both before the placement, during the placement, and after the placement as well. So even though in the university setting, we were using the employability language, the kinds of skills that we were promoting were very much linked to the key entrepreneurial behavior, skills, and attitudes like opportunity seeking, initiative taking, commitment to see things through, personal locus of control or autonomy, as it's known in the academic literature, intuitive decision making, network capacity, strategic thinking, negotiation capacity. All these kinds of skills that we traditionally associate with entrepreneurs are equally applicable to students in a workplace environment. And so that's what we did in terms of ensuring that we got the academics to understand how we go about cultivating an ethos about being entrepreneurial, even in a working setting, and B, also to get the students to reflect on their learning. So the assessment process they were involved in consciously nudged and pushed and nurtured and encouraged them to reflect on their learning and do that in a structured way so they could actively, consciously think about the skills and the capability they were developing. And through that way, we were able to develop this blend between the entrepreneurship world and the employability world. Of course, these things are always challenging. So often we would come across academic departments where you mention the word entrepreneurship and they just go, no, that's not for us. And then you have to go through an educative learning process with colleagues to help them to understand how these may be different languages, but these languages overlap and they're very much talking about the same kinds of skills that students need, particularly in a post-COVID environment, where they are going to have to learn to be adaptable, learn to explore the possibilities of when they graduate from university to set up their own business. Because if you look at the rates of graduate unemployment at the moment, certainly in the UK, but I think also globally as a result of COVID-19, there are some quite substantive big challenges facing young people. And the more we can equip them with the skills to manifest their entrepreneurial behaviors, either in getting a job and or in setting up their own venture, the more successful they will be, and so will our economies and our society.
Thank you very much. And I've seen that shift personally, actually, because I can remember in the early stages of my career, 98, 99, some comments that were made to me working in big global corporates around, shouldn't you really be an entrepreneur? Like it was a kind of bad thing. And also I can remember one section of my career where I was working for the Port Authority. I was advising them as general counsel, and I'd gone in with this crazy idea about how we could build this renewable centre of excellence. This is many, many years ago, and we could bring all of the providers together and have a working hub, and we could really collaborate. And I can remember the CEO at that time saying to me, "Nothing's broken here. So I don't know why you feel the need to fix and innovate all the time. If you're looking for excellence over and over and over again, this isn't the right place to be." And how interesting now that 20 plus years down the line, we've got these big corporate giants who are actively looking for new starters who can come in and bring that entrepreneurial spark, who can think outside the box and look at ways to innovate and build better business processes. But it does remind me of those early days where I actually was made to feel like I was a bit odd, because I just didn't sit down and allow things to go on, and trying to change and challenge and do better wasn't really something that was welcomed. My final main question of this session actually goes to Helen. So Helen, we talked at the conference last year about finance being the #1 barrier for women starting their entrepreneurial journey. I know with the work that I've done, looking at venture capital, we can see that 1 pence in every pound goes to women entrepreneurs, where they're building, where they need to access finance for opportunity. But one of the points that comes out of entrepreneurship, I think when we think about entrepreneurship, we do think a lot about profit, profit, profit. But I think about entrepreneurship as not only being something which generates revenue, but also something that focuses very heavily on social impact. And I think with COVID this year, social impact's become a real key theme for many businesses, regardless of size. Now, I am aware that you were awarded a Social Impact Award in 2017. And so I was wondering what your thoughts were about social impact businesses and the ability to access finance where that's the primary driver of the business.
Yes, I think women play key role in generating social impact, no matter in NGOs or in company or commercial companies. For example, my NGO was set up by 3 women in the community. We care more about the environment, and 2 other women, they have children, and they want their children to learn more low carbon lifestyle and sustainability issues, because they worried about their children's future. If we don't take actions, we have a very problem in the future. And we have a lot of university students working with us. 87% of them are female students. And we want to make the impact by building up the opportunities between businesses and also university students. They work with us as mentors to the community kids. And the little kids, they become our little narrators or little guides. We also developed the China's first low carbon tour, collecting my home, the community, and also the university campus. And this low carbon tour brought us 20% of the income in the first year. And we attracted 2,000 people to come to pay us for this tour. And we can see so many female students, they are interested in this kind of entrepreneurial impact, because they never thought that NGO could do such a education for the community, and they could be part of it. And 2 years ago, last year actually, we developed the China SEAP, China Eco Apprenticeship Program. So we parachute students to some eco and environmental technology companies. And most of them are female students. And they work with the companies. And it's very interesting that 80% of these companies are run by women, or they have really high level management, most of women. And this interesting part is they will interact, female students, they interact with women entrepreneurs. And they asked a lot of questions. Why you start up this, for example, bamboo made toothbrush. This is the largest manufacturer in China. And some other women entrepreneurs, they produce ultrasonic devices. And why they engaged in this business. And also they have such a good empathy, and they know a lot of female students in China, the lack of opportunities in the career, because our policy, I don't think is friendly to them. We have some new policies anyway. So I think the NGOs, we can discover this problem, and we can take actions to solve it or help solve it. So we bring the young students to the real business world and to learn as an apprentice, to learn from the real business women how to behave in the future and how to set up their life goals. And I think NGOs are very good at setting up these kind of bridges. And I think we can mainstream more sustainability concepts into a lot of other projects. I think maybe this could be a good model for some other NGOs we can share some of the experience with them. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, interesting, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, it's social impact and entrepreneurship is always a very interesting one. We have seen a shift here in the UK with more venture capitalists investing in companies with the social impact, investing in healthcare startups, edutech startups that weren't particularly desirable prior to COVID-19. And then we have seen this shift across now to look at these businesses where these businesses can make a difference to the community and the wider society. I'm tracking that as we go, but I think that next year we'll have some really great data there to see that shift in all of its glory and to see where the investors believe their money would be better used. A final question to all, whoever would like to come in, and then I think I'll wrap up the panel because I am conscious of time with the other panel about to start. But I said at the beginning of this session that I didn't want to make the session a doom and gloom session. I hope it hasn't been. I certainly don't think it has. I think it's prompted all manner of other questions that we all want to do a deeper dive on. But I did see a report that said that COVID could potentially roll back the last 30 years of economic gains for women. I would like to ask the question from the other side of the fence, in that what opportunities do we really see? I know, Kamalis, you've talked a lot about acceleration of the digital agenda, but what are the positives that we can leave with our audience here today about great things that have spurred on the Gender Equality Initiative?
Okay, I'll do a quick one to get us started, if possible, yeah. Deborah. So I think, going back to the refugee women entrepreneurs, I think, they have always had to do more with less, right? This is not just due to COVID. This has been their reality forever, right? So I think, aside from being able to adapt, quite quickly to volatility and to change, I think, yes, they have to be super resourceful. Yes, they have to be innovative and creative and so on. But I think one of the main sort of take-home messages for me was about their being a strong collaborator, right? So it's not about this idea of working as a solo player or being an individual entrepreneur as much as it was about creating these collaborations with each other, sort of, going back to this cliche about, sort of in unity there is strength, right? Mm-hmm. But you really see that amongst these communities of refugee entrepreneurs, those who've come together to work together. It increases their confidence, it increases their negotiation skills and abilities, it increases their security, right? And I think more so than all of that, it really helps them to overcome this notion of, the feminization of, sort of responsibility and obligation. Aside from everything else that women have to do, now they also have to run really successful businesses, right? As refugee women. So I think working together, coming together as collaborative entrepreneurship models was sort of a strong takeaway for me from the research with them.
Wonderful, thanks. Would anybody else like to jump in on that point?
Yeah, just something in relation to what Haya said as well, relating to collaboration. What we saw during the COVID-19, one of the biggest impacts was disruption of supply chains, global supply chains. And we saw this shift towards hyper-localization, where people had to, or large organizations had to shift, and even consumers had to shift away from their traditional access points for goods and services towards local access points and local, sourcing and alternative sourcing. And so this created, I think, opportunities for entrepreneurs as well, as they were able to take advantage of this and create that almost last mile delivery processes or delivery value delivery for companies. And this created, I think, a new type of collaboration, which we hadn't really seen as much of before, where the big companies started to depend on these hyper-localized supply chains as well. So I think this was one big outcome of this, and there has been a mutual appreciation for entrepreneurs and corporates that we've seen during this time. And in addition to that, just to add as well to something that Haya said much earlier around refugees, one of the biggest challenges I expect that they would be facing is around identities and having those identities in order to start up a business and to develop their life. And so there are blockchain solutions that are addressing this as well. So things like ID 2020, which is a project being run by the UN, if I'm not mistaken, where they are really providing identity on your mobile phone. So many refugees, as you said, Haya, they don't have computers and so on, but they have a mobile device. And with this, they can create a new identity and a new record for credibility in order to take a loan, in order to gain access to financing and bank accounts, and to start themselves off as business. So I think, the appreciation for these new technology solutions and the shift of these technology solutions to more environmental and societal solutions are growing much faster during the COVID environment as well.
Wonderful. To draw the panel to a close, I'm not sure if we've actually got any questions on the chat. I'll just have a quick look. If anybody has got any questions, would you just like to maybe unmute yourself and ask the questions in the final minutes? Otherwise, we'll end with our commitment.
Can I ask one question for Haya? I just read some report by UN. It's digital finance. Maybe this is also related to Kamalis. whether this digital finance technology has been used for the refugee camps for some refugees, if the allowance is distributed through the digital finance system. Are there any available technology to make that easier, convenient, and safer, especially for women? Thank you.
Shall I go first, Kamalis? Yeah. So thank you for that question, Helen. To be honest with you, I am not so aware of what sort of digital finance programs are available to these women in Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. But I know that the UNHCR was trying to find a means and a way of actually digitalizing the way in which they would be giving financial aid and support to some refugees that are entitled to it. So I know that it has been a problem, right, that they want to address and to make it more effective. What technology they're using to do that, I'm afraid I can't help you with that one, but I'll do some homework.
Maybe I can just add a little bit there. I know we're running out of time. But the ID 2020 project I talked about was by UNHCR, and they did a pilot with Syrian refugees. And so one of the elements they looked at is to create digital identity on your mobile phone so they can gain direct access to funding that they could use on a daily basis. So imagine walking into a grocery store and not having to pay cash, but using your mobile phone to pay, and the funds being tracked, for example, or being deducted directly from the amount you get as a refugee. So there are many different applications, and this was piloted, I think, to over 1,000 people. And it was quite a successful pilot, to be honest. Another aspect would be financing in India, for example, to women, small entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs in villages who would not traditionally get access to bank accounts. So they would also be using mobile banking and blockchain-based systems that are very secure compared to traditional banking systems. And here they would get access. One of the key issues was around women having to hand over their earnings to their partners. And there being domestic abuse involved in those scenarios as well. And so in this sense, the security on the phone in terms of the women getting direct payments and having high security or blockchain-based security so that funds cannot be accessed by anyone else, this played quite a big impact for the community. So these are two examples that I could cite. Thank you.
Okay, in closing, to each of the panel members then, Dr. Margot Thomas has asked us to think about that one thing we were all prepared to commit to in terms of an action to support women's economic empowerment. So I am just going to go around the table. Keith, I'll start with you, and just the one action that you're prepared to commit to, please.
I think with regards to the employability and entrepreneurship agenda for university students in particular, the focus that I have here is around collaborating more actively with employers to open up the scope that they have in their organizations for the students that take on placement to be a lot more entrepreneurial in the work setting. Very often these placements are very structured experiences. Obviously they serve the purposes and the benefit of the organization, also the student. But I think in a post-COVID world, we have every opportunity to use and work and enable students, empower students to be part of the transformation process in organizations more effectively. So all the reference that we had today about all these exciting technologies, very often our students are working with these technologies all the time, and often we just don't know it because it's not in the curriculum. And so we need to be far more creative about how we craft these learning environments for students, both in the classroom as well as when they're on placement in partnership with employers, that we can better leverage these technologies. And secondly, also better leverage, I think, the network capabilities across different organizations and across students within universities so that they can have the impacts that are needed in a post-COVID economy.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Helen, can I give you the same question, please?
Yes, I agree with Keith. But my question, my action would be focused on Chinese educational system for primary schools and middle schools, because in this system, 90% of teachers are female. And we would like to empower all these teachers with more mainstreamed sustainability concepts by carrying out more project-based learning, and also introducing more curriculums on sustainability, and to teach them how to transfer the knowledge to their students.
Wonderful, thank you. Kamalis, the same question to you.
So I would potentially focus on sharing knowledge around how to quickly upskill and how to, in a very pragmatic way, build your business and grow your business based on digital solutions. So for companies starting up today, for entrepreneurs today, you have access to the global marketplace, internationalization, cross-regional marketing. All of these elements are really at your fingertips. And it can be extremely simple if you know where to access the knowledge and how to carry it out. And so I could commit to potentially sharing this information, pragmatic information sources and approaches that can be used. And so I could do this through mentoring, for example, which is what I do with a lot of startups today.
Thank you. And finally, the same question to Haya.
Yeah, so an action for me, I think I'm going to go away and look at the ID 2020 program that Kamalis mentioned and learn more about that. And then I think the second action and commitment, I think given where I am in Saudi at the moment, I think I'm going to work with women social entrepreneurs, and so look at social enterprises by women for women and see where that takes us.
Wonderful, and I feel obliged to actually put my action on the table as well, given that everybody else has been invited to do so. So my action is to continue the work around supporting women entrepreneurs, female founders in trying to access venture capital. I will try and broaden the scope a little bit to access to finance for necessity, but my core lens is very much on access to finance for opportunity. But in order to do that, I feel that we all need to measure better, because we're using data points which in some cases are sort of 10 years old. So even if I can do small sample studies to get some real quality and qualitative data that I can then build around to know how best to support women entrepreneurs, I think that would be a great action. It's okay understanding that there is a problem there, but without that deep dive into the data and analysing the experiences that have fallen behind it, I feel like we're not really moving forward very much at all. So I'd like to bring this session to a close. Thank you very much to everybody for joining us, and thank you especially to our wonderful panel who again could all be individual speakers in their own right. It's very hard to kind of keep the conversation moving when I keep hearing nuggets of things and I'm desperate to dive in and tease a bit more out of there, but we were only limited to the hour. But thank you very much for everybody joining us. I think we have another session starting now in conference room 1. I think the link you'll be able to find on the conference website, and I hope you enjoy that. I'm sure it'll be wonderful as well.